Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Well, that was quite a bipolar weekend of wrestling, wasn't it? That ranged from some of the best wrestling I've seen in the last several years to some of the worst pit of dog crap I think I've been subjected to in quite some time. And we're going to talk about all of it here today on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. If you are indeed checking the show out for the first time, we are here each Monday and Friday on YouTube and Rumble, bringing you wrestling recaps and discussions on everything from the modern to the classic content. And if you're on board with that and you like what you hear today, make sure to subscribe, comment, and please like the show for me. Anything you can do to help me out here on YouTube in particular would be greatly appreciated. Obviously, it is WrestleMania weekend, so that'll be the brunt of the content we discuss today, but we're going to save that for the end of the show this week. Got to build up to that one a little bit. But we got a decent amount of stuff to talk about before, and that includes our usual NWA Powerrr and AEW Rampage report, as well as a very special tag match that I watched this weekend that I wanted to cover, just because of how good it was. Wanted to throw my 2 cents in there, considering I've been a big fan of tag wrestling pretty much all my life. And when I see actual good tag team wrestling, which is a rarity in the business anymore, I want to make sure I cover it. So this one's going to be a longer than usual podcast, so let's get going with it. Of course, starting with the roller coaster ride from Friday night's AEW Rampage. And this is probably going to be another relatively short Rampage recap, because this was another one that I didn't have a whole lot of anything constructive to say about when it was over. Now, bearing in mind, it is WrestleMania weekend, and there were already like 50 other things going on top of Rampage. This just felt like another show they were just phoning in, which, I mean, let's be honest, is just about every Rampage we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months. It opened with the Beta Bucks and Top Flight doing a bunch of choreographed ballet dance class theatrics. Notice how I mentioned nothing there about wrestling. And of course, you've seen one Beta Bucks match before, you know why. And believe me, we'll talk about some real tag wrestling in a little bit here, because by God, if there was ever a weekend in wrestling to perfectly draw the analogy of fake versus real tag team wrestling in the modern era, this was the weekend to do a side-by-side. So that'll suck donkey dick. And by the way, what a great return for Top Flight, right? Finally back working as a team for the first time in well over a year, and they've been beaten flatter than Brie Bella's ass every week. We had a stupid skit where Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti wrecked Dan Lambert's car for some reason. By the way, whoever's decision it was to give Ty Conti a sledgehammer for this segment, bad call. We had the House of Black in a 6-man against Fuego del Sol, Evo Uno, and Stu Grayson. Yeah, they've totally given up. Beta Bucks accepted FTR's challenge to the rematch. Apparently that's going to happen on the upcoming Dynamite. I won't hold my breath that FTR actually go over in that match. Jamie Hayter won a tournament qualifying match against Sky Blue. Again, a tournament we still know nothing about, aside from the fact that it's all centered around the Owen Hart Foundation. And the main event was Keith Lee taking on Powerhouse Hobbs, which almost made the show worth the watch. If it weren't preceded by 30-something minutes of bullshit prior, I'd probably have had a better mindset going into this one. Isn't it ironic, though, the match between the two big guys that work the slower style actually ended up getting the biggest reaction of the entire show? You might think that has something to do with both guys actually bothering to work something resembling a professional wrestling match where they actually built drama as the match went along. They told a story, if you will. They bothered to sell shit. They had heat angles. They took their time when transitioning from spot to spot in the match. There was an actual genuine interest in seeing which guy overpowers the other one. Hobbs is so good, man. I don't know where they found this guy or how long he'd been working on the indie circuit before signing with AEW, but that guy is a real gold nugget in that cesspool of suck that they've got under contract right now. Like, his facials are great, his basics are on point, he just knows how to work a natural big guy style. You know, obviously putting him in there with Taz has paid massive dividends for him. The only thing that's still baffling to me about the whole thing is the fact that no matter how often it looks like they're actually going to do something with him, he ends up losing. Go figure. The match was going along fine until all the garbage run and stuff at the end, which you could see coming a mile away. Ricky Starks tries to hit the ring apron with a chair, but Keith Lee punches it away. Swerve Strickland runs down and gets involved, and this is where things just became incredibly stupid. Because Hobbs gives Keith a spine buster. He has a visual pinfall on him. Meanwhile, the ref is outside yelling at Starks and Strickland for God knows what reason. Other than the fact that the people agenting this shit have no clue what they're doing. And fast forward a minute later, Keith scoops up Hobbs, hits him with the fireman's carry power slam, and beats him. Ugh. And I've already covered the Keith Lee stuff before, so I'm not going to get into that again. The fact that he's basically become Mr. Rampage now pretty much says it all. But, yeah, that was a completely forgettable Rampage show. Any news updates on whether or not ROH is going to be continuing with any kind of taping schedule going forward? Because I can tell you one thing, this whole Rampage experiment is really getting old now. It's the same dull formula every single week, and it's funny, the more I watch, the less I feel like I have to talk about when it's over. Of course, anytime I see a Beta Bucks match book for the card, I already kind of going in with a sour mood to begin with. It sure ain't like watching an FTR tag match, that's for damn sure. And speaking of such, I did want to take the time to throw this in there as part of the recap this weekend because the FTR versus Briscoes match has been a dream tag match that people have been craving for quite a while now. And with the restrictions that Tony Khan's under with television executives over at TBS, with the whole controversy with Jay Briscoe, it's pretty apparent this match was never going to happen on AEW programming, which is a whole other conversation entirely that I really don't want to get into right now. Other than the fact that it's complete bullshit and totally apropos of our pussified cancel culture mentality these days. But I'll tell you the reason I wanted to see this match in particular. I talked about this when I recapped the Crockett Cup last week. The Briscoes have always been a tag team that I respected for their hard work and dedication to the business. But I may be one of the very few ROH watchers back in the day that can confidently say that I've never been a big Briscoes fan. Now, part of that problem may have to do with the fact that when Mark and Jay were really at their peak as tag wrestlers, they were also having to compete against teams like the Kings of Wrestling or Haas and Benjamin, who, I mean, I can confidently say I was much bigger fans of them in terms of their working styles. You know, the Briscoes have always been a team that were good at modifying their style depending on who they were working with, but yeah, I still maintain that their matches still felt a little too indie for my taste. Now, of course, I compare the Briscoes in 2022 with a lot of the other garbage tag teams we see today, and yeah, they easily stack up as one of the best teams on the market right now. That said, I'm a big FTR fan. Always loved their style. I appreciate that there's a concerted effort on their part to actually work like traditional old school tag team wrestlers, and even if they're heels most of the time. When I watch an FTR tag match, I actually buy that they've watched and studied old tapes and that they understand what made tag team wrestling so great back in the day. And the other thing I love about Dax and Cash is they always go the extra mile to show that they care about the subtle things. Even if it's something as minute as imprinting the FTR logo on the back of their trunks with the old school Ring of Honor font. Particularly when they're breaking out the old school Ring of Honor tag belts for the match tier 2. Like, it makes sense that they would do that. So there's a lot of detail to cover in this match. But again, I'm going to start with a small praise that I gave with the Keith Lee Powerhouse Hobbs match, because this is the kind of shit that I look for in wrestling that is so far and few between these days. And also, it separates these guys from the Beta Bucks and their indie level trash. Pacing. Not going balls to the walls from the opening bell and killing all the momentum 2 minutes in. This is the kind of tag match that needed the slow feeling out process to start. Because subconsciously, you knew in the back of your head going into this match that things were going to get more heated as it went along. The story's been calling for it since all 4 guys have basically been jaw-jacking on social media for the last 3 or 4 months. But because they were physically locking horns for the first time here, they needed that slower pace where they could do the mind game trickery. Let Dax and Cash get in the Briscoes' heads and try to throw them off their game early on. And of course, that evidently was going to lead to the big spot early on where once Jay started out-wrestling Dax a little bit, Dax got up, he spit in his face, and that amped up the intensity a little more. But again, not too much where the Briscoes just went full-fledged roid rage mode, because logical storytelling indicates that's exactly what FTR wanted. They want the Briscoes to start fighting emotionally. That way FTR are in the driver's seat. So, the Briscoes look like smart baby faces with sticking it to FTR. And again, dude, I still can't believe I had to talk about this shit in tag team wrestling anymore. The keyword, tag wrestling. But we actually got that in this match. Legal tags in and out. Guys not overstaying their welcome in the ring longer than necessary. Referee Paul Turner actually trying to adhere to some form of tag ruling here. Now, yes, to be fair, we did see a good amount of leniency where there were periods where all 4 guys were wailing away on each other in and out of the ring, and Turner wasn't being too strict with his officiating. However, here's a case where you can argue it was fine in the interim, because at least the chaotic brawling was done to lead to an actual angle in the match that became an integral part of the story. They do the deal on the outside where all 4 guys are getting into it. It's starting to break down a little more. The guys are up in the ante, and they do the spot where Dax and Cash give Jay the catapult into the timekeeper's table. Jay does a nice little blade job, and now the babyfaces are in a vulnerable situation. So there's your little heat angle where FTR can spend time working Jay over and actually build up anticipation for that big hot tag at the end. Meanwhile, the heels are being dastardly and doing some underhanded things in the background. Cash cutting off Mark on the ring apron behind Turner's back. Again, dude, subtle things, but they make all the difference in the world. Especially when it's done in such a way where it doesn't make the ref look like a goddamn idiot when he sees all the bullshit going down in plain sight. Of course, Mark finally gets the hot tag. He's a house of fire on FTR. People are going nuts for it. And now is the time where you start implementing more of the false finishes and some of the more big oh shit moments. Now that the fans have seen the hot tag and now they're anticipating that the finish is in the not so distant future. Briscoes get an ear fall on FTR after the first initial comeback. FTR end up coming in and cutting off the Briscoes from behind. They get a near fall on Jay after a slingshot powerbomb frog splash combo, which people pop for. Now Dax is bleeding from the forehead, so FTR looking more vulnerable now. Briscoes hit Dax with the big rig, but that's only a 2 count. And it makes sense because, the Briscoes haven't used the finisher before, so there's an easy outing with using a guy's own finisher against him, where he either knows how to kick out of it or the guy executing the stolen finisher isn't going to know how to execute it properly. And of course, fast forward, things are totally breaking down by the end. All four guys end up doing the big standoff. They're selling the exhaustion. They do the 1-2 exchanges, which actually look like they're laying into each other and not being overly cooperative with it. That's great. I complain about that shit all the time. Cash gets momentarily dumped outside, and now the Briscoes figure that this is their time to capitalize. So they get Dax isolated 2-on-1. They go for the Doomsday spot in the corner, but Cash, who had been selling for a little bit on the outside, he regains his footing, cuts off Mark. They send Jay to the outside floor. They get the big rig on Mark. 1, 2, 3. New champs. Of course, afterwards, it's the big pomp and circumstance deal with Kerry Silkin coming in to present FTR with the belts. They do the show of respect. They shake hands with the Briscoes afterwards, which I was fine with. And they've already kind of been teasing the face turn with them already, so it makes sense here given where their character direction seems to be going. And it also made sense, the Beta Bucks doing the run-in afterwards with FTR already leaving through the curtain so they can lay out the Briscoes. Albeit that kind of ruined the segment for me, but I won't let it totally kill the mood. The other thing I loved about this match, though, is that they left enough breathing room for a rematch down the road if by happenstance they ever felt they wanted to revisit this program. So there was a lot to like about this. Was it a perfect tag match from beginning to end? No. Were there nitpicks that I can make here and there about the match? Yes, and I sort of went over them throughout the course of this recap here. But again, I revert back to the common theme of what I talked about at the beginning here and why I wanted to review this match to begin with. It's real tag team professional wrestling, man. What else is there to say? It's 4 grown-ass men doing a heavy-hitting back-and-forth smash-mouth fight. And to be honest with you, it's matches like this that actually piss me off that much more than I'm watching this great fucking tag match happen on a Ring of Honor show in front of, I don't know, maybe a couple thousand people. Meanwhile, I'm watching Matt and Nick Jackson do their fake no-sell flip-de-doo fuckery on live national television in front of millions of people. So the real wrestling is being broadcast on a pay-per-view in front of significantly less people, while the fake modernized wrestling happens in front of millions of people nationwide. How fucked up is that? But again, man, hats off to both teams. That was a great tag match that felt like an old school main event level program with real top guys. The Briscoes they've been very enjoyable to watch recently. And I maintain that I still run pretty hot and cold with them depending on the dance partners, but them working with FTR in the future, that's always going to get a stamp of approval from me. So right now, this definitely ranks as one of my favorite matches of the year so far. I guess I should throw this in there too. This was the only match that I watched from that Ring of Honor Supercard show. As I scouted the card beforehand on the wiki page, it didn't seem like there was anything else on that show that really appealed to me. But right now, this is probably one of my favorite matches of the year, if not my favorite match of the year. Like I said, not a perfect match. It's probably not a whatever star rating we're at the Dave Meltzer scale, an 8-star match. It's certainly not that. But this is probably one of the best tag matches, if not the best tag match I've seen in a long time. And that's coming from me. And if you've watched this podcast before, if you know my stance on a lot of the business now, especially when it comes to the way AEW presents their product, let's just say I'm rather critical on the way they present wrestling. But this is real wrestling. Or at least as close as we can get in 2022. And that'll take us to NWA Powerrr from March 29, 2022. And we begin with Matt Cardona doing a pre-taped interview with Kyle Davis, which was basically all centered around the story of Tim Storm, of all people. Cardona insinuated that Storm nearly cost him the world's title toward the end of the match when all the run and interference was going on, which is odd to me. Perhaps this is revisionist history on my end, but I could have sworn that the main story coming out of that world title main event from the pay-per-view all had to do with Mickie James accidentally costing Aldis the belt, because Jeff Jarrett had thought that it was Mickie that cock-blocked him when it was Chelsea Green that did it. How does Tim Storm fit into this equation? Unless there was something that wasn't caught on camera that I totally missed, I don't remember Storm getting physically involved in any capacity during that match. He may have jaw-jacked with Cardona a time or two, but beyond that, I'm drawing a blank on that one. Regardless, Cardona basically laid out the challenge to Tim Storm and told him that if he can beat Cardona in a non-title match, he will personally go to Billy Corgan and have him waive the stipulation of Tim not being able to wrestle for the World's Championship ever again, which I believe was a stip that dated all the way back to the Nick Aldis-Tim Storm World title match a few years ago. I think right around the point NWA was relaunching for the Power tapings. And of course, Storm accepted this when they cut to the booth. And I can get down with that. I love Tim Storm. Yeah, that guy's still working in his late 50s, and he still looks great. Great physical shape. I don't know, he's got like the Bruno Sammartino level of babyface respect from the crowd. Like, and you know, with him going up against Cardona, who's basically heel for life as long as he's wrestling in the NWA, that match has a chance to get some nuclear heat. I don't know, there's kind of part of me that wants to see them do a long-term program with that. Opening match featured Maddie Runkowski, who indeed was the same chick that got squashed by Nyla Rose in 15 seconds on Rampage the other week. She wrestled Camille here in the opener. And I guess I should point out here that in the NWA, she goes by her ring name, Maddie, quote, just Maddie, unquote. Because apparently Runkowski is too difficult to pronounce or remember. I don't know, it's not as difficult to pronounce as Michael McGillicuddy, and that name was infamously bad in WWE. I like watching Maddie work on these NWA shows, though. Even though she's mostly a jobber, like, her stuff looks good. And she's got good basics, good facials. She works like an old school heel. I like that she trash talks in her matches and tries to be engaging with the studio crowd. AKA she's trying to be a heel. There's something there with Maddie. You know, we all know how critical I am of a lot of female talent in the business today. Plus, it helps that she doesn't look like she's fucking 14. Now, that said, I can't say I was a particular fan of her getting in as much offense as she did on Camille. I still don't think Camille should be selling. If she is, minimal at most. Especially if she's going to be booked as a monster heel. But she ended up going over the spear, and based on the pay-per-view based on the fallout from the pay-per-view, kind of looked like their eventual plan was to go with her and Kylie Ray for the belt. And it has the potential to be a solid match. I've been a relatively good fan of Kylie's work, and I don't know. Maybe that would be the time to do the belt change. Yeah, by the way, I just thought of this. I don't know why this just came to mind right now. Has anyone noticed recently how Mickie James has just dropped off the face of the earth on this show? Remember there was a period of time where she was all over this program? It felt like they were giving her more attention than Camille. Kind of interesting how she's completely disappeared from the show. Following that, we had Pope doing an interview with Mae Valentine. And he basically let everyone know that he's still looking to go after the World's Championship. But he also addressed Trevor Murdoch. And well, it definitely seemed they were going the direction of turning Trevor heel after that promo he cut at the pay-per-view. Maybe the idea is to do him and Pope, which, I don't know, could be interesting. Probably could use that as the launching pad to put Pope over and send him at Matt Cardona for the title later in the year. I still hope that's the end game because, God, I still remember venting my frustrations over a decade ago watching TNA royally fuck up a golden opportunity to put their world title on Pope when he was white hot. I remember, I think he wrestled AJ on a pay-per-view for the title. I remember they spent like months building up Pope for that match. Like it really looked like they were going to put the belt on him, and it'll never happen. I have no idea what happened or whose call it was to go with, or whose call it was not to go with Pope as the champion, but I'll tell you one thing, dude. If you know your TNA history and you kind of followed the Pope's career pretty thoroughly throughout, you would know it pretty much ruined his career after the fact because Pope was never the same after that match. We had... Okay, I wrote Rodney King in here, and I don't know why. I believe I meant to say Rodney Mack. Anyway, he was in a squash against Magic Jake Dumas, which was all kinds of mid-90s WWF level terrible. Dumas is doing a cross gimmick between a magician and Ebenezer Scrooge with a cigarette butt. It's pretty atrocious. The match was also lousy AF, so that was another problem. And that's all I really have to say about it. Dumas won with a roll-up after blowing tobacco in Rodney's face and grabbing his tights. Big whoop. After that, we had One of the Naturals 2.0 teaming up with Jeremiah Plunkett to face Mike Knox and VSK. Mike Knox also sporting a literal t-shirt that reads, and I quote, "It's me, Mike, from wrestling," unquote. Just to make sure even he acknowledges how generic and interchangeable he is when it comes to big bald guys in the business. I kid you not, I think I even talked about this before. When I first saw him debut and lay out Trevor in the cage last year, I thought it was Braun Strowman. I had totally forgotten that Mike Knox was ever a thing in wrestling. That's how long it's been since he's been relevant. Anyway, the match was mostly an enhancement match for Knox and VSK. The best part of the whole thing was Velvet Sky getting pissed off at the heels, which, for any of you that have ever heard Velvet pretend to be mad, it is sheer comedy every time. Again, though, really not much else to say about it. We had a Chris Adonis interview with Kyle Davis, who basically just let everyone know he's done with Strictly Business and he's gunning for another shot at the national heavyweight title. Sion did an interview with Mae Valentine, basically let us know that the rematch with him and Tyrus for the TV title is on. No mention of any kind of mask versus title deal, but that might come up once we hear Tyrus' response. And then Taryn Terrell interrupted, and I immediately fast-forwarded. I don't know what she said. I'm sure it was all kinds of level of ear-splitting and horrible. Nick Aldis had a squash against some guy named Deontay Marshall. Tapped him out with a clover leaf. And then he let us know afterwards in an interview that he wants Cardona in a rematch for the belt. Again, very strange though. Nothing mentioned here about the Jeff Jarrett angle. It's like we're totally supposed to forget that Jarrett was even part of that pay-per-view or that he DQ'd Aldis in the match to begin with and fucked him over the belt. There was also no discussion of Mickie James or Chelsea Green. I can't explain that. And the main event was La Rebellion versus The End for the World Tag Team Championships with Dem Boys on commentary, Mark and Jay the Briscoes. By the way, I did not mention this in the Ring of Honor recap, but the fans did chant, "Thank you, Briscoes." There had been speculation that they were done with ROH after that show. I cannot confirm one way or the other, but the fact that they are doing more appearances with NWA right now kind of gives me the sign that they actually might be done with Ring of Honor for the time being. Don't know what to make of that. This also had to have one of the dumbest pre-match jump starts I think I've ever seen. Odinson and Perro jump the champs before the bell. They proceed to stack them up on top of each other like plywood after 2 body slams. And after Perro goes to cover one of them before the ref rings the bell, the ref just decides, okay, he's going for the pin now. Go ahead and ring it. Beyond that, they had a match. It was just kind of there, if I'm being honest. It did have another incredibly reckless-looking spot where Perro went to hoist up Bestia in a powerbomb position. I have no idea what the fuck the guy was thinking, but while he has Bestia up in the powerbomb, he goes over to the rope where it looked like he was going to do the Hurricane Rana reversal spot over the top rope to the floor, which still would have been incredibly stupid, but at least it was something you had seen done before in the business. Instead, Perro just dumps Bestia over the top while he's dangling upside down. Bestia almost lands right on top of his head on the concrete. Bad times. The finish saw Mecca do a suicide tope to Odinson, and after Perro got cut off trying to hit the top rope move to Bestia knocked Perro off the turnbuckle and hit him with a 450 splash to retain. And this was all basically done to tease the showdown between the Briscoes and La Rebellion, which I'm sure will be the match where La Rebellion actually drop the straps. At this point, I don't even see what the purpose is of keeping the belts on them. I honestly can't even remember who they beat the belts with for to begin with, but it's felt like those guys have been champions for like 3 years without ever actually accomplishing anything as the champions to begin with. And it's not to knock them as like bad champs or anything like that, but I've talked about it before with the NWA's wacky taping schedule. Like sometimes they'll go through periods where a particular talent isn't booked for a set of tapings, so it'll be like a 3 or 4 week gap where we just don't see guys in any capacity on the show. And La Rebellion have definitely been part of that equation before. And plus, you think about it for a second, the Briscoes are a much more over team than La Rebellion. I think their style works a lot better for the NWA model than Bestie and Mecha Wolf. I also like the combination of potential matches they can do with Mark and Jay. So, we'll see where they go with it. Really not a whole lot happened on this one, if I'm being honest, though. It was mostly all centered around the main event tag title match, which wasn't much of a match to begin with. But I talked about this in the fallout of the pay-per-view. The world title picture has a lot of intrigue right now. I like the stuff with Cardona and all this. I like that they're keeping Trevor in the equation right now and doing a little bit of a heel tease with him. Pope still being factored in there, and that's all good. This particular episode just kind of felt like one of those old school studio recaps from the retro series we've been doing. Just a bunch of lifeless squashes and a couple angles here and there to keep you on your toes going forward. And when I say squashes, I guess I mean a modernized 2022 definition. Squash matches in 2022 are definitely not the same as squashes from the mid-'80s, but it is what it is. Well, we've arrived. Yep, this is WrestleMania. The night where stars are born and legends are made. Even though WWE hasn't produced a single fucking star or legend in their company in well over 10 years now. And boy, was that ever apparent by the time we got to the main event. Cue Steve Austin. But more importantly, as I had to hear from Michael Cole ad nauseum for a good chunk of both nights, this is apparently the most stupendous night of the year. Why stupendous? I have no idea. Apparently, Vince McMahon was going through a dictionary and said, "Oh, God damn it, pal, this is going to be a stupendous WrestleMania. That's a tagline we're going with this year. It's such good shit." Yeah, sure is, Vince. Sure is. And there's quite a bit to say about it. I will say I expected to hate it a lot more than I did when both nights were concluded. I guess when you don't have much of an emotional investment in a bulk of the matches or stories, it's easier for your low expectations to be exceeded. But we are going to cover both nights here. Try and come up with an overall analysis of both shows once we review them in full. I will still go on record by saying that the two-night WrestleMania thing is beyond idiotic. I could give them the benefit of the doubt as a test run when they tried it 2 years ago. It was something new, something innovative, but when the card was as underwhelming as it was going in, there's no reason they couldn't have condensed this into a one-night show. And they could have easily cut the first 3 matches from night 1 entirely, and it would have been a lot better off. That and the women's tag match from night 2. Oh, good fucking Christ. That was atrocious. So we open night 1 with Pat McAfee being really annoying during Shinsuke Nakamura and Rick Boogs' entrance. And for those of you living under a rock, Shinsuke is still using the same theme he used when he showed up in WWE 6 years ago. It is a pretty sick tune, don't get me wrong, but McAfee having an orgasm over it is a little much for my taste. Also, it should be noted that because I do not watch Raw or SmackDown, I knew very little about Rick Boogs here. I remember watching him do some powerlifting angles in the Royal Rumble match and being really unimpressive beyond that. And as it turned out by the end of the match, the one thing that he actually was talented at, that being lifting up guys in the air and doing really cool things with them, well, that blew up in his face big time. Anyway, they wrestled the Usos for the SmackDown tag titles, and when you factor in ring entrances and introductions, the opening bell rang at approximately 15 minutes past start time. Another way they could have easily shaved off a whole hour of WrestleMania alone. Cut out the 6-minute entrances. Good Christ. Anyway, the match was going along relatively fine until Boogs went to try and hoist up the Usos in a double fireman's carry, and his right leg buckled out from under him, and that basically capped off his run in the match. Found out later in the night that he has a torn quadricep patella and will apparently require surgery. So I guess he was watching some old Vince McMahon tapes from back in the day and said, "Gotta make the boss proud." Would have been more epic if he'd have blown out both of his quads. I kid. Obviously the injury was unforeseen and very unfortunate. I don't know if the plan was for the Usos to drop the straps, but definitely made for a rather disappointing opener. Not that the match was anything to write home about prior to the injury. Like I said, it would have sufficed as a top-of-the-hour TV match, but a WrestleMania caliber match, not in the slightest. I really don't have a whole lot to say about it beyond that. It sucks that this is what Shinsuke's doing in WWE these days. And that dude was a rock star when he first showed up in NXT, but we all know how that story went. And the Usos have been around forever. I know they've been doing some work with Roman in the last couple years in the main event picture, but every time I see the Usos in a match anymore, I just roll my eyes at this point. They're not a bad team, but I've seen just about every incarnation of an Usos match at this point, and by now I'm just over them entirely. Up next, we had Happy Corbin versus Drew McIntyre. So, of course, with something like 4 months of build, Corbin trying to kill McIntyre with a chair on multiple occasions, thinking that they'd want to get a hot start with McIntyre just going to town on Corbin from the jump to pop the crowd. Well, of course, they didn't do that. Instead, they immediately have Corbin jump McIntyre after the opening bell. So I took that moment to take a piss, and when I came back, Corbin was still getting heat on McIntyre. And by heat, I mean Corbin was beating on McIntyre, and the crowd was sitting there with their hands down their pants. Once McIntyre took over, it picked up a little bit, but God almighty, Corbin bores the brakes off of me. The video beforehand where they kind of show the time lapse of him going from broke Baron Corbin to wealthy, happy Baron Corbin. Again, I haven't been watching the TV shows, but didn't they do something similar with Cameron Grimes in NXT like a year ago where he just randomly came into wealth through GameStop investments or something? Didn't they align him with Ted DiBiase? I mean, Grimes is so much more charismatic than bland-ass Baron Corbin is. And they tried some stuff here. one of the big stories was McIntyre kicking out of the End of Days, which they played up as being the first time that ever happened. I'd have to go back in the archives and watch some NXT tapes to find out whether or not that's true. Of course, McIntyre ended up taking advantage, hit Corbin with the Future Shock DDT, and then killed him with the Claymore for the 3. Last couple minutes of the match were pretty good, but, I mean, that's about the best you're going to get out of a Baron Corbin match. But what a total waste of Drew McIntyre for a WrestleMania payout. Christ, wasn't this guy main eventing against Brock Lesnar for the world title like 2 years ago? Yeah, granted, it was during the torturous pandemic era, so no one remembered it ever happened, but God, I felt so bad for McIntyre here. Watching him wrestle second on the card here against Baron fucking Corbin. Talk about having no vision for a guy, and especially Drew McIntyre, who's actually proven to be a pretty hardworking commodity for your company. I mean, talk about the ultimate comeback story for that guy, especially when you look at his first run in WWE. I did laugh when he went to slice off Madcap Moss's head afterwards, but he ended up chopping through the top 2 ropes. Clearly gimmicked, but man, what a big fuck you to the ring crew. So then we got this Rey and Dominic Mysterio versus Miz and Logan Paul tag match. By the way, can someone explain to me what the WWE's fascination is with women referees in men's matches? Not only does it look completely absurd, but it just totally weighs the match down. Like, can you imagine back in the day if they'd have had a women official try and call a Ric Flair Dusty Rhodes match or a Rock and Roll Midnight Express tag match? Of course not, because it'd be fucking retarded. It would totally destroy the credibility of the business by putting a 100-pound female official in the ring with 2 grown-ass men that could have seriously put her in grave jeopardy. Being in the line of fire like that? That was probably the one thing that pissed me off the most about this show. Too many women referees in men's matches. Ridiculous. Like, you want to put them in there with the women, that's one thing, but the men, cut that shit out. Anyway, what can you say about this match? Quite frankly, what can you say about it? You got The Miz involved for one. Another guy that's been around forever and never ceases to bore me to tears. I talked about this a little bit on the Friday show. I don't know who Logan Paul is. I don't give a crap who Logan Paul is. I took one look at him in there, and the only thing I could think was, remember when celebrity bookings for WrestleMania actually used to be a big deal? God, where do the fucking Mike Tysons or Mr. T's go? Meanwhile, in 2022, their key celeb is a fishy, pale, dorky-looking YouTuber and TikToker. Of course he's a TikToker. That's apparently the new fad these days on social media. And we wonder why our generations are so fucked up. The match wasn't bad or anything, but I just spent the entire time shaking my head watching Dominic. Like, he's in there, and not only is he fucking horrible, but he looks like he should be working the cash register at a local Walmart. Sorry, not sorry. I'm sure he's a nice kid. I'm sure Ray trains with him extensively, but this kid should not be wrestling on national television, much less getting a WrestleMania spot. You're telling me Finn Balor isn't good enough to get a slot on the Mania card, but fucking Dominic Mysterio is? I call BS. And of course, after the heels go over with Miz pinning Mysterio, Miz lays out Logan Paul afterwards for whatever reason. I guess because he's sticking around now and he's going to feud with Miz. Big whoop. Now, I'll try to be fair because I know people have been raving about how great Logan Paul was in this match. And while I wasn't all that impressed with him, I will say that he's got more personality than like 95% of AEW's talent pool. Like, the dude at least has facials and tried to be a heel during the match. So in that aspect, I'll credit him. But like I said earlier, these first 3 matches on night 1 were borderline torturous to get through. A bad opening tag, followed by a boring TV-style match, followed by an underwhelming celebrity match with a random pointless heel swerve afterwards with Miz turning on Logan Paul for no reason. Definitely wasn't WrestleMania quality, I'll tell you that for sure. But I will tell you for a fact, If there's one thing that this show desperately needed to make it stupendous, it was an appearance from Stephanie McMahon, doing her usual corporatized HR level speech, being thankful for the fans and making dreams and moments come true. And gosh, she's fucking annoying. You want to talk about the epitome of X-Pac GFY level heat? Stephanie's pretty high up on that list. It's either that or a toss-up between her and the Beta Bucks. Thankfully, this was mercifully short. She was just there to do a brief intro for Gable Steveson, the Olympian. So, of course, out comes Steveson, looking blank and dumb. And he stood there. And he stood there. And he raised his fists. And he stood there some more. And he shook Stephanie's hand. They went in for a hug. And he stood there. And then they left. And that was it. Lame. Then we got the Bianca Belaire Becky Lynch Raw Women's title match, which is a story that I totally forgot dated all the way back to the previous SummerSlam, because I reviewed that show. I had totally forgotten that Bianca lost the title to Becky in 26 seconds. And again, I have not followed the story all that closely, but it would seem that this is another match or feud that they've kind of staggered and dropped the ball with recently with the build-up. Based on the video that aired, it seemed pretty apparent to me that they've actually tried to make Becky a heel the entire time, which I remember being the big swerve from the SummerSlam match, and people were confused as all get out. Like her big return from maternity leave when she was red hot as a babyface, and of course when she comes back, they have to do a swerve. Regardless of character dynamic, Becky Lynch is definitely one of those talents that's won me over pretty substantially over time. I was never the biggest fan of hers in NXT, but there was a period during her main roster run, it was like right when she got called up, where I thought she was insufferably bad to watch. But imagine that. All it took was losing one match to Charlotte Flair, and she became the hottest thing in the business because everyone was pissed that she lost a championship match when it looked like it was her time and the people were really getting behind her. Of course, with WWE and their obsession with ramming Charlotte up my sphincter for the last 7 to 8 goddamn years, I really shouldn't have been all that surprised that they tried to ruin Becky Lynch over it. But Becky's been pretty great over the last few years, particularly with her character evolution. And gosh, she looked fantastic coming out for that entrance. As stupid as they were for apparently cutting Becky's hair in a random heat angle on Raw for no reason, and she's embracing that new look with the trim bangs. That was a badass entrance. And she looked like a real megastar. What wasn't badass was the Texas Southern State University Marching Band and their garbage-ass, flatter-than-Brie Bella's ass performance of Bianca's theme. God, that was putrid. Sorry, I'm a musician, so when I hear bad live music performances, that sticks in my craw. That said, I'm a pretty big fan of Bianca too, and she looked pretty great coming off of her entrance, so I won't let the terrible music performance weigh it down too much. Of course, this was the match where they had the male referee. Had to throw that in my notes there. And I did say on the Friday show that of the two women's title matches, the Becky-Bianca one was the one I was looking more forward to. Or I was looking forward to more, I guess I should say. And there were some good moments here and there. You could tell both girls were trying to work hard. They were taking it seriously and trying to make it feel like a main event level match. Obviously, the butterfly effect came into play here. You could tell they were nervous and trying to remember particular spots. Transitions weren't very smooth from time to time. I can't say this was a great match because it really wasn't. I'd be stretching it if I said it was good, given the level of choppiness in terms of spots. The layout and structure was another problem for me too, especially when they tried to do the hot start with having Becky lure Bianca in from the handshake and then both girls immediately started doing quick reversals out of the gate. Becky hit the manhandle slam in like the first minute, and then Bianca kicked out. WWE has a tendency to do these kinds of breakneck, oh shit, quick starts just to, catch the fans off guard. Sometimes they work well, and other times they don't come off well at all, especially when the match has to go another 15 plus minutes. So this was a case where I think the jump start actually kind of made it a hindrance to the match rather than enhancing it. Becky doing that senton flip and kicking Bianca right in the face with the heel of her boot. How in the fuck she didn't shatter Bianca's orbital bone, I will never know. That was sickening to watch. Finish was pretty cool, even though Bianca went into Super Cena mode and completely no-sold all the crap she got put through like 2 minutes prior. But it was a nice feel-good comeback story for Bianca after basically getting fucked over at SummerSlam. Up to this point, it was the best match on the show, but all fairness, it was preceded by 3 blasé men's matches anyway. But I will give it this. This was the first match on the card that actually felt like it was presented as a WrestleMania caliber match. So even if I can't say the execution was perfect, this at least had a bigger fight feel than the other matches up until now. I don't know where this leads Bianca and Becky after the fact. I presume a rematch at next month's pay-per-view. I mean, this is WrestleMania after all. We can't have feuds end at the biggest show of the year. That would make too much sense. I gotta save the payoffs for the lesser important live events, or whatever WWE's calling these special events these days. But then came the real highlight of night one. It's Seth freaking Rollins versus the mystery opponent of Vince McMahon's choosing. And whatever on God's green earth that gear was that Seth was sporting for this match. So whether or not you were following the media or buzz going into this, it may have affected your overall shock reaction when it actually happened. What shocked me was the fact that they actually used pretty much his entire AEW ring entrance. Theme music, pyrotechnics, camera angles, the whole gamut. Yes, to the shock of pretty much no one, except for a handful of the 78,000 people in attendance, the hand-picked opponent for Seth was indeed Cody Rhodes. All 222 pounds of him, blonde hair, neck tattoo and all, which will never not look hideously rotten. It was a pretty spectacular moment. Got the right kind of reaction. That big initial babyface pop for the return, which I guess wasn't all that surprising. Whether or not that babyface reaction is maintained in 4 to 6 months, that's yet to be seen. But I'll go ahead and throw this out there when I say that this was easily my second favorite match on night one, bar none. It was certainly the best wrestling match on night one, that's for sure. We can talk about Cody here too, but I want to tip my hat to Seth because I have not seen this kind of style from him in a very long time. Really kind of felt like I was watching an old Tyler Black match from the Ring of Honor days. And of course, with Cody's ring style, which is a little more old school and mat-based, I think I see now why they went with Seth as Cody's dance partner for the big return. I've not been the biggest fan of Seth's work in the last several years in WWE, but the one thing I will never take away from him is how gifted of a worker he is. The 500 character changes he's been saddled with in the last 6 years have been utter garbage, but I mean, you can't really blame Seth for that. But for the kind of wrestling I enjoy, this felt like a Mid-South NWA upper card main event level match. Was it the smoothest match in the world? No. Cody looked a little off his game in some key parts. I think you could tell he was visibly frustrated trying to go for that signature moonsault a couple times here and there because the first time he did it, he actually overshot himself and almost came down in like a cross-body position onto Seth, which didn't look all that great. And there was a point toward the end where he gave Seth that underhook tiger driver, but he didn't get enough height on it, so the impact with the slam kind of fell flat. Like, you even saw Cody audibly scream, "Damn it," afterwards, so obviously you knew he was pissed. But for what this was, I enjoyed it. They did a couple big dive spots, but they weren't overstayed. Cody got in a couple of his big signature moves like the Cody Cutter, which is still a stupid move, but I digress. I thought the pacing of this match was done well. The story was good. They definitely got the crowd into it by the end, after getting off to a relatively slow start with all the chain wrestling and the mat holds. I will say this too, this just came to mind to me. Something that WrestleMania always feels like it needs is either like a mid-card or upper mid-card level program without championships or any kind of belt or title at stake. Just like a upper card feud with two main event level guys that are just feuding to settle a score and find out who's the better man. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like what would be a good example of that. Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels, that would be a good example. I don't remember what WrestleMania that would have taken place at, but the WrestleMania where Angle and Michaels had their match. There were no belts on the line. They didn't main event the show. They were actually relatively placed in the middle of the show as far as I recollect. But the reason people remember that match as being so good is that it was two elite main event style wrestlers having sort of like a grudge match to just find out who the better wrestler was. This wasn't on par with that, but it was in that same vein. So I don't know if WWE has done a great job with these kinds of programs in recent times, but this felt very refreshing, especially for a Mania-style match. Cody made the big comeback at the end. He did the 2 crossroads to Seth. And then right before the third one, he did the old Dusty tribute with the bionic elbow. And that's when you saw the people really come to life here. So after Cody hit the final crossroads, the match actually felt like it culminated at the peak. So like I said, it was not the cleanest match in the world. I probably wouldn't say it's like a match of the year contender or anything, but the one thing that became abundantly clear to me as soon as Cody came out for this match is how much bigger of a deal he feels in WWE than AEW. The Cody Rhodes AEW story is always going to be very weird to analyze when you look back through the scope of wrestling history. Whatever that whole thing was, I think in the back of my head, there was always some inclination that Cody was never truly happy in AEW. I always got the sense that his relationship with Kenny and the Bucks just felt off. And this is even going back to watching him in like the Ring of Honor days. Like, they're very polar opposite personalities and mentalities when it comes to the business. I think there's definitely a bit of a styles clash there. They may be friends in real life. I obviously don't keep in touch with Cody's personal life. But when it came to the television product, you can tell that there was a clear-cut difference between Cody's vision of AEW versus the Elite's vision of AEW. Now, as we find out, Cody's no longer with AEW, so I think we get a better sense of which side Tony Khan was on the entire time. But going back to what I just talked about with the presentation of Cody, the WWE version of him already comes off as a bigger league deal than the AEW version. I think Cody's style meshes better in WWE. He's easily going to stand out amongst the pack in terms of card placement and stardom. I also think he's going to have an easier time getting a better set of opponents than he did in AEW. I mean, when you really think about it for a second, like really think about it. Remove the AEW blinders and try to be impartial here. When you look back through Cody's matches in AEW, what do you remember off the top of your head? You remember the great match he had with Dustin, and you remember the great match he had with MJF, both of which were old school NWA Mid-South main event caliber matches. Beyond that, though, most of Cody's ring work in AEW never reached that level, especially during the pandemic era and a little ways post-pandemic when he was barely on the show anyway. And again, we don't know Cody's road schedule or the dates he's working, so I don't know how many times we're going to see him in a given year working big matches. And while the jury is still out on how long it takes before WWE drops the ball with him again, for one night, the return felt special. So we'll see where Cody winds up when I come back for my SummerSlam review in the next several months. Do I think he's the guy next in line to challenge Roman, possibly even beating him to become the world champion? right now, I won't rule it out of all possibilities. I wouldn't put stock money in it, but Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns could be a great top shelf world title program if booked correctly. It'll sure be a fresh way to get Brock Lesnar out of the equation, because God knows I ever need to see a Brock Lesnar Reigns match ever again in my lifetime. So after this came the Hall of Fame class recognition. Man, what a great year for me to be back here discussing wrestling on YouTube again. Getting to recognize The Undertaker as part of the 2022 class. That makes this totally worth the investment. Talked about it before. My favorite wrestler growing up as a kid, and here I am, 2022, still ranks as my all-time favorite. Still get goosebumps hearing that theme music, man. It's been 20-some years, and still one of the best theme entrances WWE's ever produced. Now, I did not watch the induction ceremony from Friday night, I believe, but when they announced that The Undertaker was going to be headlining the Hall of Fame class this year, there was the part of me that really wondered in the back of my head, what do they do with Taker's speech? Does he break kayfabe? Does he stay in character? Do they try to do some combination of both? And, well, I guess we got the answer, sort of. He ended up doing some kind of combo between Mark Calloway and The Undertaker. For WrestleMania, they played his entrance and everything, but, he came out in the suit and the ponytail instead of the typical top hat, the trench coat, and the gloves. I guess figuring that Taker's kind of broken kayfabe more in the last several years with doing the podcast appearances and the talk shows, the mystique was already kind of gone anyway. So him just being normal Mark Calloway didn't bother me as much as it would have, say, if they did it even 10 years ago. And obviously I don't want to discount the inductions of the Steiners and Vader and Sharmell and Shad Gaspard either. It's a solid little class there for 2022. Obviously, I was a big fan of the Steiners growing up, and, when I watched the video package with Scott talking about how dangerous it is giving him a live microphone, of course, I started laughing. Any of y'all that have followed Scott's career, you know how legendary that man is when it comes to unscripted material. Vader, obviously another fan favorite of mine growing up. Sharmell, she was always great with Booker, even though she was one half of the worst wrestling matches of all time in TNA. Shad's story is obviously a tragic one, but, him getting the Warrior Award for this year makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to throw that in there as part of the discussion. Even though it's WWE's Hall of Fame, which you have to take with a grain of salt a lot of the time, I actually didn't have any qualms with this year's class of inductees. That was some real solid stuff. And we got the Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair match for the Smackdown Women's title, which was the women's title match that I had zero interest in when they announced it. And again, haven't watched any of the TV shows, so the hype package beforehand was all fresh material for me going in. But I gotta ask this. Did Ronda actually say to Charlotte, and I quote, "I'm either going home with your arm or you're going to tap out," unquote? And they left that in the video package? God, talk about amateur hour. So I did a little digging here after night one, just to see if I was in the minority or just how out of touch I am when it comes to the wrestling market in 2022. I was glad to know that I was not the only one that thought this match sucked cock. Now, I have my own reasons for why I thought this match sucked cock, but I think the general consensus is that this was no good at all. I laughed at the spot 30 seconds in where Ronda tried to trap Charlotte in an ankle lock, and then she voluntarily let go so she could pull up her tights. Phenomenal. Look, I know a lot of people like Charlotte. For goddamn sure, I know WWE loves them some Charlotte Flair. They've made that abundantly clear in the last 7 or 8 years with the amount of force feeding they've done to ram her down my throat and up my arse. I couldn't stand Charlotte even dating all the way back to watching her work in NXT. For so many years, I had to hear all the idiot fans raving about how fucking awesome Charlotte Flair is. She's the top of the 4 horsewomen, the best worker, best on the stick, best overall character. She's a megastar. She's this, she's that. Meanwhile, the only thing I could think the entire time I ever watched her is, what on God's green earth are these people fucking smoking? Look, David Flair got into the business too in the late 90s. Doesn't mean his wrestling career was any fucking good either. Do I even need to mention Eric Watts? How about Lacey Von Erich, huh? Y'all remember her back from the TNA days too? Now, I should be fair. Charlotte is a much better wrestler than David Flair ever was, but that's like asking if I'd rather have hot soup poured on my crotch or a firecracker lit up my asshole. Charlotte's terrible, dude. I don't know how many different ways I can phrase this. Her wrestling is shit. It's always been shit. Every time I watch a Charlotte match, I'm just counting down the seconds until I see the next botch from her. It's become a drinking game to me at this point. Out of the, 800-something Charlotte matches I've seen in my lifetime, I don't think I've seen one match from hers where she does not visibly fuck up something royally. Her basics are garbage. Her selling is garbage. Everything she does to try and impersonate her dad looks so low rent in Bush League. She's a prime example of the takeaway from the Dusty playbook. Don't do shit you don't know how to do. You don't do shit you don't know how to do. Case in point, that stupid moonsault she does from the top rope where she lands on her feet and then tries to hit the standing salt on the ground. Every single fucking time, without fail, she either grazes the chick she's supposed to land on or she outright misses entirely. The latter of which happened here with Ronda. They did a bunch of sloppy submission transitions. All of it looked awful. Of course, it didn't get any better by the time we got to the big angle of the match. Ronda ends up giving Charlotte that sloppy-looking fireman's carry Samoan drop thing she does. Goes for the pin, but Charlotte's foot's on the bottom rope, so Charles Robinson waves it off because he accidentally counted 3. So Ronda's pitching a fit for a minute. They do a near fall after a natural selection. Ronda ends up fighting off the figure 4, sends Charlotte into Charles Robinson for a ref bump. Of course, that's when Ronda taps out Charlotte with a cross armbar, but the ref doesn't see it. It's all pandemonium. People are flipping their lid, the whole 9 yards. I'm just sitting there looking at my watch, wanting the thing to be fucking over. God, what a lame finish. All that chicanery, and Charlotte just whiffs Ronda in the face with a crappy-looking boot and pins her. Talk about a popcorn fart. I guess the finish was a big surprise. I don't know why you brought Ronda back if you were just going to beat her at Mania, especially if she's sticking around after this. Other than needing a match for next month's live special, I guess. And I know I spent a lot of this match poo-pooing on Charlotte, but Ronda Rousey's another one that I just have not cared about in a long time. Ever since her Mania debut with Kurt Hunter and Stephanie, I just haven't been on board with anything Ronda's done in WWE. She does have a level of star power that supersedes a lot of the female talent they have right now, but the novelty of her wore off a lot quicker for me than I thought it would. Like, she got really exposed in the ring not long after that debut match. Probably because they started putting her in single showcases where she had to carry the match on her own instead of in a tag setting. And the other problem, too, is they had her work too many dates. You want to talk about somebody that should be working a very minimal schedule and only be doing special kinds of matches. Ronda Rousey's one of those people. I have no idea where this takes them in either party's case after here, nor do I really care, but I continue to maintain that Charlotte Flair is pure garbage. If anyone wants to try and prove me wrong about that, I encourage you to try and do so in the comment section. Point to me, name me one single Charlotte Flair match where she doesn't noticeably botch something or look sloppy with her ring work. And I say this as someone who greatly admired Ric Flair growing up and loved watching his matches. I don't care if she's the daughter of the legend. Her matches are butt, and everything I've seen from her since I watched her in NXT has been pure butt. At least back then she had a couple redeeming facial qualities until all the Botox injections. Now she just looks like a butt. Good thing this didn't close out the show, though, because that would have been a major dud to go out on. What did close the show on night one was absolutely the right call. And whereas when I said the Cody-Seth match was my second favorite match from night one, the final segment was my favorite thing overall from night one. The Kevin Owens show with special guest Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I will be the first to admit that talk shows in wrestling used to actually mean something of value. That is before everyone got a talk show and they all ended up leading to the exact same formulaic brawl angle and they ceased to be special anymore. You want to talk about some classic talk show stuff? Go watch some of those old Piper's Pit segments from the mid-'80s. Now, those were some money wrestling segments. They also they used to have higher production value, too. Instead, what we had here was Owens having 2 chairs and 2 lame-looking signs in the corners of the ring. They didn't even get him like a carpet or anything. And I'll concede, it did not start off too promising with the whole cheap heat thing that Owens was doing, spending about 10 minutes running down Texas and calling everyone a bunch of dumb rednecks. Feeling like I was watching an old SpongeBob episode. Can we say the plants from Texas are dumb? Can we say the shoes from Texas are dumb? But man, I'll tell you something. When that glass shatter hit and Steve Austin came out for the entrance, that place came unglued. This is what I was referring to at the beginning when I remarked on WWE not creating any megastars in the last 15 years. Try creating a professional wrestling star in the business that can get a quarter of the babyface pop for that entrance that Austin did. Cody Rhodes wish he could have gotten that level of a pop. In the initial sit-down was a chance for Austin to break out some of the old catchphrases. Obviously, the "what" chant came into full effect, which I think still ranks as the best and worst chant ever developed in the history of wrestling. It's been a ticking time bomb for the last 20 or so years. When used in the right way, it can be very effective, but it can also be pretty damn annoying too. But we'll cut to the chase here because Owens basically told Austin that he lied with why he called him to be a guest on the show. He did not bring Austin to have a sit-down discussion. He wanted to have a fight. Specifically, an impromptu no-holds-barred match. And with bad legs, bad back, bad neck, thick, heavy braces and all, Steve Austin obliges, says you get a goddamn ref down to the ring. And Steve Austin and Kevin Owens proceed to have an impromptu no-holds-barred match that ended up being not only my favorite match on night one, but one of my favorite matches of 2022 thus far. And trust me, that's not just because of the nostalgia of seeing Steve Austin back in the ring. I was surprised that Austin did half the stuff he did in this match, much less going for 15 minutes. Like the mud hole stomps in the corner weren't quite up to snuff with some of his work from the late 90s or even early 2000s, but Austin took some bumps here. Took a back bump on the concrete when they were crowd brawling, took some weapon shots over the back. Obviously, Owens was working smart with him, and they weren't doing anything reckless, which is probably why I loved it so much, because even though it was no holds barred, they didn't do anything to needlessly expose the business. There were no thumbtacks, no barbed wire, no flaming tables or broken glass. It was all angles. It was all big babyface pops for Austin's offense. Owen sold like a machine here. It was safe. It was professional. And the people were emotionally into it from beginning to end. Take note, AEW. Here's how you do no DQ matches right in professional wrestling. You know, Austin drinking beer during the match was awesome. absolutely perfect finish with Austin kicking out of the stunner from Owens. Owens goes out to grab a chair, but they do the old heel trope where Owens goes to whack Austin near the ropes, but the chair deflects back off and clocks Owens in the face, knocks him for a loop. Austin gives him the big stunner. Owens takes a great bump. 1, 2, 3. Great little finish. People went crazy. Austin gets the big ride off into the sunset. Gets to share a few beers. Gives Owens a second stunner, which was awesome. I think he gave one to Byron too. I was only sort of half paying attention with all the post-match celebration stuff. I know people are going to look at this and think that they totally buried Owens here. Whatever. Kevin Owens is where he is in WWE at this point. He's obviously making a lot of money. He got the main event night 1 of Mania against Steve Austin, which was a dream match of sorts that people had been talking about for quite some time. Like if the Punk match wasn't going to happen, Kevin Owens was a close second that people were throwing into that conversation too. So I don't know what people are talking about, saying they buried Owens here. Now, it wasn't like they just had Austin go in there and pin him in 8 seconds. What they did a few years prior with Rock going in there and squashing the Wyatt family in under 3 minutes, yeah, there's an argument there that was a total burial. Especially when you look at what happened after all 3 guys after the fact. But this is a great main event. Easily the highlight of the first night for me. Definitely made that 4-hour sit-through worth it. And overall, just to give a brief breakdown of night 1. The Cody, Seth, and Owens Austin matches were great. And the rest of the show was sort of the rest. The first few matches were kind of there, easily forgettable. The Raw Women's title match with Bianca and Becky was decent. Not the cleanest match in the world. Maybe slightly disappointing, but was what it was. The Charlotte Ronda match was atrociously bad. Actually didn't falter too much from my initial predictions now that I think about it. If anything, I think I underestimated the Owens-Austin segment. I did not actually think they were going to have him do a full-length match. But by God, they did, and what can I say? Austin's still the fucking man. But now on to night 2, which was, well, a much different vibe from night 1, that's for sure. By the way, I did not mention this at the start, but I loved how Peacock labeled these shows as WrestleMania 38 Saturday and WrestleMania 38 Sunday. Not nights 1 and 2, but Saturday and Sunday. Hopefully next year they'll just decide to cram everything into one night and we won't have to worry about it getting broken into 2 separate shows entirely. But it kicked off with Triple H coming out to thank the fans, welcome everyone to the show, and well, that was it. No big speech, no 20-minute Raw opening monologue like the good old days. He did leave his boots in the ring, which obviously signified the finale of Hunter's in-ring career. I don't think that was a newsflash story for anyone at this point. That's been pretty public for about a week or so now. Really not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. It's sad. Hunter's health has kind of been a talking point for a long time now, but when you factor in that on top of all the other corporate BS going on behind the scenes, it kind of makes the whole situation a lot more shittier. But it was a cool moment. Triple H is one of those guys that I'll always sort of have a love-hate relationship with. Like when you look past the whole world title nightmare from the mid-2000s and the fact that he really kind of overstayed his welcome as a top guy in the company, yeah, he's still someone that I respect for his work and dedication to the business over the years. He's had some real great moments and career highlights, and I was very appreciative of what he was able to do with that NXT brand right before they completely cut his balls out from under him and left him twisting in the wind with the whole rebranding garbage late last year. Definitely wish him all the best, though. And I hope we see a little bit of a road to redemption story for him in the coming years, even if it doesn't equate to him working a match ever again. So the opening tag was RK Bro, Street Profits, and Alpha Academy for the Raw tag titles. And I've talked about it 100 times by now. I've really grown to hate multi-person matches in wrestling anymore. Once upon a time, they didn't bother me as much. You know, 3-ways and 4-ways in wrestling actually used to feel like big attraction style matches. And then we started seeing 3-ways and 4-ways virtually every week, and they're all wrestled and paced exactly the same. It's all just big move, big move, big move, false finish, false finish, false finish, big finisher, and then someone runs in to steal the pin at the end. And that's pretty much what multi-man matches are in 2022. Just replace the word move with dive. Of course, it didn't take too long for all 6 guys to break down into the windmill punch exchange. That annoyed me. Not that there was any real coherency to tag formatting in this match to begin with. I'll say the crowd was pretty hot for it, and that's fine. You know, everyone digs the whole big move spectacle ordeal, and that's all wrestling pretty much is anymore. It's all the people really give a shit about because everyone's a moves mark and they don't understand what used to make the business actually generate money back in the day. And the thing that sucks is, like, I actually liked a lot of guys in this match. Chad Gable's awesome. I liked Otis when he was doing the heavy machinery thing in NXT. I don't mind the Street Profits. You know, they were pretty over in NXT at one point when they were the champions. I even like Matt Riddle too, which you might think is pretty shocking for someone like me and the kind of wrestling I like. Can't say I'm a big fan of the toenail polish, but we all have our tastes, I guess. Randy Orton, I have not been a big fan of in well over a decade now, but he seemed to have cooled down in the last several years where he's acted more professional and less like a childish dick. But again, I can't get into the whole flashy move style. It's just not for me, and I see way too much of it anymore. It all just feels like old news to me. There was a great TNA moment during this match where Dawkins and Ford hit a big doomsday neckbreaker combo onto Gable, and they go for the big dramatic near fall. And as the ref is counting, they choose that moment to cut to a shot of the crowd so he missed Gable kicking out. If I didn't know any better, I thought that Keith Mitchell was in the production truck. RK Bro retained after stereo RKOs from Riddle and Orton, and the crowd popped big for that. The RKO out of nowhere will always be the greatest meme ever established in the wrestling business, and it's probably still the most over finisher in the business today, maybe give or take the stunner. And the people really seem to dig this team, so credit there. I don't know why, but there was an instinctual part of me that was waiting for Orton to turn on Riddle for absolutely no reason. I guess because it's WWE and I'm used to them doing the most illogical contrived thing imaginable. The afterbirth with Gable Steveson going in there to toast with the baby faces and then hit Gable with a belly-to-belly overhead throw. I mean, it looked fine, but I have a feeling that was supposed to generate a bigger reaction than it did. They're really kind of pushing that dude hard right now. And while he still has the personality of paint drying, it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do with him. Part of me is waiting for the moment Gable Steveson becomes the heavier push talent over Cody Rhodes and they end up putting the world title on Gable before Cody. That would just be delicious. Up next, we had Omos versus Bobby Lashley. God, I'm sitting here talking about Drew McIntyre getting the big middle finger for the Mania payout this year. What about Bobby Lashley, dude? Wasn't this guy just beating Brock Lesnar for the WWE title back in January of this year? And granted, I know the whole injury thing kind of fucked up their plans, so maybe they initially had bigger visions for Lashley before they had to change course of direction, but the best they could come up with for a backup plan was Omos. Ugh. God, what can you even say about it? This was not Taker Giant Gonzalez WrestleMania 9 terrible, but it wasn't exactly Goldberg Lesnar from several years ago either. I was expecting a train wreck and a half. It was harmlessly dull. The most notable thing about it was watching Lashley take that buckle bomb bump in the corner and then smacking the back of his head off the LED ring post. God, that looked brutal. Like, how he didn't end up concussed is beyond me. The thing that didn't make any sense to me here, though, is why didn't they save this match for the big angle of Omos getting knocked off his feet for the first time? Like, based on the video package, it looked like they aired that on Raw, which was just dumb. And correct me if I'm wrong. Again, this could just be the old man shouting at the clouds here, but when things used to be done right in wrestling, wasn't the whole point of booking big lumbering man matches to get people to pay to see the big guy get knocked off his feet for the first time? That's what they did with Yokozuna back in the day. Pretty sure it was Hacksaw Jim Duggan to knock him off his feet first, right? They made a big deal out of that. Now, yes, Lashley did give Omos an overhead suplex in addition to 2 big spears, but probably would have come off better if we already didn't see Omos get knocked off his feet beforehand. Again, though, call me old school. I don't know what Lashley winning means now that they've unified the world title, unless Lashley's next in line to challenge Roman to fill time between now and SummerSlam. I don't really see where he fits on their show right now. Guess I'll probably be reading about it at some point. Well, guess I gotta talk about this thing. This Sami Zayn, Johnny Knoxville, anything goes garbage. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Pure garbage. Sami Zayn, who looks more and more like an outlaw part-time truck driver every time I see him on camera. Talk about a fall from grace. That guy used to be one of my favorite characters in NXT like 7 years ago. Great underdog babyface who actually looked like he shaved more than twice a year and hit the gym once in a blue moon. God, now it's a toss-up between him and Adam Cole in terms of worst physiques on live TV today. And whereas the Steve Austin-Kevin Owens Anything Goes match was actually a well-put-together, coherent, no DQ style match, this was every lame, garbage plunder match I've seen on pretty much every AEW show in the last month. Garbage cans, chairs, stop signs, tables. Didn't break out the glass for this one, but we did get mouse traps, and I think what was supposed to be Mark Henry and Mae Young's birth hand, whatever that fucking prosthetic leg contraption was. Now, I guess I should mention this. I've never seen the Jackass series, nor am I familiar with any of the characters that showed up throughout this 15-minute catastrophe. I think by the time Naked Midian 2.0 came in, I had basically just given up trying to care. There was apparently a midget in there named Wee Man who body slammed Sammy. And that probably got the biggest pop of the entire match, believe it or not. Look, this is one of those you either love it or hate it kind of matches. I've seen enough of the outlaw indie hardcore matches to basically last the rest of my lifetime. You can call me a stick in the mud if you want. I don't give a shit. If you're into this kind of mud show, sports entertainment crap, good for you. But this is not the kind of wrestling I enjoy. It's not what I grew up on. And like I said, it's not even like the celebrities in this thing were characters I had any interest to begin with. It was just a bunch of goofy comedy spots with all the Home Alone booby traps. And obviously the boys in there looked like they were having fun, and the people enjoyed it in the arena, so it got over. But I don't know, Thought it was dumb. And then, of course, Sami had to later like a jackass pretending he was caught in that stupid mouse trap while Johnny pins him in the middle of the ring. Is it the worst Mania match I've ever seen? Probably not. Does it rank high up there in terms of stupidity? Oh, God, yes. It also probably didn't help that a lot of their pre-planned spots with the contraptions looked like they just came off totally inauthentic in execution. Prime example being Johnny having great difficulty actually getting the metal spring to fold over on Sami when he tried to pull the giant rope. That was fantastic. But this is the kind of thing I'd expect from WWE, so didn't bother me as much as it would have, say, if I saw it on AEW where they claim to be sports-based wrestling. At least WWE acknowledges that they're into this horse shit. And while we're on the subject of bad stuff on the card, let's talk about this 4-way match for the women's tag belts. Belts that purely exist for no other reason than the men have tag belts, and we're in the equity culture where women need equal treatment to the men, otherwise we're all misogynistic pigs. Never you mind that every single fucking girl in this match just looked like a random pairing of singles talents. Like, do they even have an actual division in WWE? Or is it literally just throw girls together and call them tag teams? They're all makeshift? God, why even have the belts? I mean, considering the champions are Carmella and Zelina Vega going in, I guess that speaks to the low level of credibility they have. God, this match was terrible. Rhea and Shayna were perfectly fine. I expected that because those two are actually talented workers. Sasha was her usual botchy self. Liv Morgan fucked up just about every spot she tried. Naomi and Natty existed. And Zelina and Carmella are just awful. Zelina actually used to be great when she was a manager, but then she got the Lana treatment where they took one look at her and they exposed her faster than a blink of an eye by making her wrestle. Took away the one good quality she had. It was overly choreographed spots. Everyone was out of place for a lot of it. I had no idea why Carmella was wearing a face mask the whole time. Is it because she's supposed to be the hot babe who doesn't want to get her face fucked up? So why is she in the wrestling business? Start an OnlyFans account if you're so obsessed with being hot. There's plenty of beta guys out there that'll pay for your services. Naomi and Sasha won the belts, if you care. I don't think I'll lose sleep knowing that Carmella and Zelina are no longer the tag champions. But let's talk about something good. Let's talk about AJ Styles versus Edge. I guess I should say, up until the lame finish, which completely ruined it, it was good. It was long, for sure, and there were definitely a few periods during this where I kind of started to get a little impatient, sort of wondering why exactly is this match getting so much time. But I will definitely agree with the mass opinion, which is a rarity for sure. But I can definitely get on board with this being a big-time dream match that actually made logical sense to do. Edge has had one of the best comeback stories in recent memory. He looks fantastic. His matches, from the ones that I've seen, have mostly been great. And even though the heel turn looked like he came right the fuck out of nowhere and had absolutely no rhyme or reason to ever happen, I mean, I've always preferred heel Edge over babyface Edge. Obviously, AJ is phenomenal, no pun intended. You know, he's someone I've always had a great amount of respect for, even going back to his run in TNA where it always seemed like they were destined to sabotage him at every turn. I guess AJ was watching some Ric Flair tapes before he walked through Gorilla and said, "Flair thinks he's the king of blade jobs. I'm so badass, I'm going to gig before my opponent even comes out for the match." Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Rick. Anyway, I will note from the beginning here. Yeah, I've always hated the lockup exchange at the beginning of matches when guys are supposed to be in an alleged grudge feud. The Seth Cody collar and elbow tie-up from night one made sense because, that match was all centered around Seth not knowing who he was facing going in. It's like you could buy that they would want to do the feeling out process to start. But with AJ and Edge pretty much having a clear-cut heated rivalry that's been brewing for a while, like the collar and elbow deal at the beginning, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Especially with those guys who are professional and have been in the business long enough to know better. But yeah, as I mentioned with the Cody versus Seth match, for the kind of wrestling I love, Edge and AJ had the best work match of night 2 by far. A lot of what they did was very simple, but it was all effective. And they worked body parts, they sold. Their timing was just about perfect from start to finish. They made sure that they let the match breathe and they built up to the big spots, especially when you factor in that they went something like, 23, 24 minutes or something. It wasn't the most exciting match in the world, but the people stayed with it. If that means anything in today's immediate gratification business. But they built up to the near falls by the end. The crowd got more emotionally invested. I don't know how I felt about Edge taking a suplex on the ring apron to the floor, especially at his age. Unless it was going to immediately lead to the finish, I probably would have just avoided that altogether. Of course, with AJ given the move, he's not a reckless moron, so you can at least trust AJ was going to be safe with him. Again, though, all of this was going pretty well right up until the last minute where they basically went with the stereotypical WWE finish that made virtually zero sense. So they're going back and forth, couple reversals. Finally, AJ gets the Styles Clash for a 2 count. And he goes over to the ring apron to try and hit the phenomenal forearm. And while he's setting up Edge, he turns to look over his left shoulder. And who should be standing there but Damian Priest? In typical WWE fashion where he has to strike a sideways pose so we see the facial reaction on camera. And Priest stands there basically unmoving. AJ kind of blows it off momentarily, but as he goes up for the forearm, Edge catches him with a spear, 1, 2, 3. Even the crowd's reaction was kind of like, ugh, really? After all that, that's your finish? And I don't have anything against Damian Priest. I like Priest. I thought he was great in NXT, and he did some real good work down there. His theme music was dynamite. I remember that. I had that shit blasting in my car stereo when I was driving into work one day. But aside from the fact that it was another completely random angle that occurred without any build or reason, as far as I'm aware, unless I missed something in the video package, just kind of felt like a flat finish. I get they want to continue the feud, and there is something about the dynamic of Edge and Priest that I think could work well together on TV. Especially if they try and implement some of those old Brood tropes from the late 90s. And just as long as they don't have Damian start drinking fake blood like Gangrel did. And, the match was good enough where I could totally justify a rematch, but yeah, like I said, good match, not great. Maybe a little long for my money, especially when the payoff at the end was kind of a subpar in execution. But this is a good matchup for Edge. Both guys are not young by any stretch, but they've got enough experience in the business where this is the kind of program that you can expect both guys to be professional with and usually be on the same page with their ring work. So if this is going to be a program that continues going forward, I'm all for that. Even though I don't watch the TV shows, and I can't imagine they're actually going to carry this program all the way to SummerSlam. After this, we had Sheamus and Ridge Holland versus The New Day, which lasted about as long as the initial lockup with AJ and Edge from the previous match. I mean, honestly, I wish there was more to say about it, but there really wasn't. The New Day came out with their Big E-inspired ring gear. Obviously, the neck injury from Smackdown was very devastating, and Thank God Big E looks like he's going to be fine. But, judging how they laid this match out, you'd have thought WWE could have cared less about Big E breaking his neck on live TV. This is an active fuck you middle finger from Vince McMahon to Big E personally. At least that's what it felt like. It was a messy squash. Babyfaces got beaten flatter than a pancake, and it was immediately to the Hall of Fame 2022 class. Thanks for coming, New Day. And don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out, Big E. Then we got Pat McAfee versus Austin Theory, and everything that came after the fact, which was glorious and hideous and legendary, all wrapped into one bow. But we'll start with the initial match because this is one of those matches that I was pretty optimistic for going into the show. Pat McAfee really impressed me in that match he had with Adam Cole a couple years ago. And even though it happened during the empty arena era, Pat showed in one match that he had more personality and ability than most of the young guys training in the business right now. He's certainly far and away superior to everybody on NXT 2.0 right now. And even though I thought his NXT run was abruptly short and rather disappointing, I really dig Austin Theory. I saw him work an Evolve show a couple years ago, and the first time I watched him, I knew that guy was going to be a big deal. I knew Vince would love him too, but God, I didn't think they'd actually go as far as to have Vince basically take Theory under his wing as a pupil. But he did announce Theory as a future Universal Champion, which shouldn't be something people gloss over. Now, granted, Vince changes his mind on a whim, but that's the kind of statement that I wouldn't be all that surprised to see Theory as the top champion of this company sometime in the next year or so. And the dude looks fantastic, and he's like, 24 years old or something like that? Like, if he stays healthy and in shape and he takes his craft seriously, that dude's got a good amount of time on his hands in WWE. I'll tell you something else. When it comes to WrestleMania 38, and you look back on the two most over talents on this show, bar none, you got Steve Austin at number 1 and a very, very close second in Pat McAfee at number 2. That dude was over like wildfire in this match. When they did that series of vertical suplexes and Pat blocked that third attempt and threw Theory overhead, those people went nuts. A vertical suplex. Not even like a stalling suplex where he holds Theory upside down for like a couple seconds. No, just a straight shoot snap suplex. That got a pop. Just to reassure that you don't have to do trampoline backflips and ninja stunts to get people to react to something. But there was a lot of great stuff in this match. Theory's a fantastic, slappable dirtbag prick. McAfee's a great babyface in peril. Vince sitting there on the outside was just awesome. You know, even the subtle things he does, where he just smiles when Theory's in control, or he's covering his face when McAfee's making his comeback. It's all very subtle movement, which for Vince at his age, most of his movement is subtle. But boy, does it resonate. The highlight by far was the spot where they're battling on the top rope and Theory's fighting off the superplex attempt. And Theory tries to shove McAfee off, but then he does that moonsault and lands perfectly on his feet. Does that huge leapfrog all the way to the top rope and hits Theory with the superplex. God, what a reaction that got. And what a fucking athlete that guy is. Like, I kind of wish they'd have taken the finish home right then and there because, God, you want to talk about the opportune time to end a match. Yeah, that was the time to go home. But they did a couple more brief exchanges, and Pat ended up rolling up Theory for the flash pin, which still got a big reaction, but not to the level it would have got if they'd have taken it home after that superplex spot. But this is where things got knucking futs, to borrow a famous quote there. Because Vince is talking with Theory on the outside, and they're about to leave when Pat starts mocking Vince and calling for him to fight him in the ring. And this right here, people, this right here is what you look for in terms of WrestleMania moments. Vince is 78 years old or whatever, and him just standing outside the ring and doing the suit jacket removal tease, like that alone got a major pop. Even though it sounds completely and totally preposterous on its face, to think a guy like Vince would actually be crazy enough to work a match at his age. You got to know those people would be craving for it for God knows what reason. Even Vince undoing the cufflinks and stripping off the tie, just doing that little smarmy smirk at Pat the entire time. You know the people wanted it. They're bouncing up and down in their seats, and Vince is just milking it and milking it. So then, of course, Vince rips off the dress shirt, and he's got a wife beater on underneath. Dude's still ripped and jacked to the gills. He's in better shape than I am, that's for sure. Christ, he's in better shape than 70% of the North American male population. And I'm sitting there watching this. Vince gets into the ring. There's a referee that has just randomly appeared in the ring. Pat McAfee is also still in the ring. And my eyes began to bug out as the referee rang the bell. Yes, he rang the bell. Vince McMahon is in the ring. And the official rang the fucking bell. This man is crazy. Also demonstrated how much of a bigger star Vince is than everyone in that company put together. So, yeah. Vince and Pat had an impromptu 3-minute match, which consisted of Vince giving Pat a couple clotheslines. They did some heat spots with Theory. Vince didn't take one single bump. And after a bit of selling on Pat's end, Vince grabbed a football, punted it into Pat's ribs, and then he pinned him. Because in 2022, in Vince's final WWE match, we can only hope, Vince McMahon took one look at that and said, "Oh, I'm not putting Pat McAfee over here at Mania. I built this place. That doesn't work for me, brother." And just when you thought things couldn't get any more legendary, Theory and Vince are celebrating in the ring and milking the heat from the crowd. Who should come out but Stone Cold Steve Austin? And yes, for the record, I know it's going to get brought up here that Vince jump-started the music hit when they played Theory's music in the first go-around. Vince had the initial oh shit reaction, kind of jumped the gun a little bit. So, yeah, that was kind of unfortunate. It totally spoiled that something big was going to happen. Oh, what do they call that in football? False start. 10-yard penalty to Vince, 1st and 20. But even after all these years, man, Vince is so great at visually selling fear and trepidation when Austin interrupts his segments. Because he knows his history with Austin. He knows that when Austin's glass shatters and he comes down to the ring to confront Vince, it's about to go down. So out comes Austin. He gets into the ring, gives Theory the stunner. Theory takes the greatest fucking bump for it. It's just awesome. And this is where the people came unglued. Because now comes the face-off between Austin and Vince. And Vince is just fantastic here. He's just begging and pleading for his life because he knows he's about to die. But Austin has a better idea. He's not here to stir anything up. He's just coming down to share a few beers with Vince. Let bygones be bygones, if you will. After all these years, let's put the story to bed. We all know where this goes. We don't have to go back to the well with it. Let's just crack open a few cold ones and let's just take it home. So they crack open a few cold ones. I love the first go around where Vince stopped drinking the beer to check and make sure Austin wasn't about to boot him in the stomach. That was hysterical. But evidently you knew it was all coming. And God love him, Vince took the stunner. and it was fucking horrible. Legendary, epic, blockbuster, but still fucking horrible. Which I don't think a single person in the room figured otherwise. I will never forget this segment for the remainder of my life, though, man. What a classic WrestleMania moment. Vince McMahon at 70-some odd years taking the worst stunner in the history of all stunners. Which I guess is apropos for Vince, because I don't believe there was ever a period in the business where he took a good stunner. Even going back to the late 90s. And just to keep me rolling and laughing, they had to let him get one in on poor old Pat McAfee, who also took a fantastic stunner. He did the old Kurt Angle bump where he just stands straight back with his head tilted toward the ceiling, and then he just falls back like a lumbering piece of wood or like a collapsing shelving unit. God, it was awesome. Oh, this is by far the highlight of either night for me. This should have main evented night 2 and closed everything out, because goddamn was it awesome. And, whereas the Knoxville Sammy segment was goofy, stupid cartoon crap, this segment right here was the kind of goofy professional wrestling that I could buy. This was actual sports entertainment wrestling done right. Great match with a great impromptu oh shit moment, followed by Steve Austin coming out and stunning 3 guys, all of whom took their own version of the oversell. I'm never going to get over that gif of watching Vince take that stunner. That was so epically horrible. It surpassed it and just became awesome. What a moment. What wasn't awesome was what closed out the show. Yeah, that's right. I got to cut out all the fun now. Got to break this back down to Lance Storm's super stern, super serious mode. Got to talk about the winner-take-all match with Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. The supposed greatest Mania match of all time, even though that's complete and utter bullshit, because the greatest Mania match of all time just happened less than 5 minutes prior to this. How you felt about this main event is pretty heavily dependent on how you feel about the Brock and Roman saga at this point. I've seen this match so many times in the last several years, and for as much as WWE has tried to pump this up as being on the same level as an Austin Rock feud, to me, I just never saw it. Like, Brock's matches haven't resonated with me in a long time, and, Roman's done some amazing stuff with his heel roll in the last couple years, but, at the end of the day, dude, the pen to paper still reads Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. We've seen it once. We've seen it twice, and now we've seen it thrice. That, and on top of all the other incarnations of this match we've seen over the years. I'm over it at this point. And truth be told, there really wasn't a whole lot that was going to change my mind to get me to think otherwise, regardless of how the match played out anyway. As it turns out, the match ended up falling short of anything remarkable or fresh, which I really wasn't all that surprised at. It was the same Brock-style match we've seen a million times, just suplexes and F5s galore. It was all big moves and false finishes, which, again, the people are going to pop for because it's all the people pop for anymore. Yeah, they tried some stuff in there with Roman getting in the belt shot at Brock, and whether or not that whole Roman shoulder injury is a work or not, I'm still unsure. Yeah, but Roman winning with a spear from virtually out of nowhere. Oh, man. It's like, again, that's the best he could come up with for a finish. Like, I already really wasn't digging the vibe of this to begin with. And, going through my notes and looking back at the notes I took on this match, there really isn't that much more to elaborate on now. Maybe I'm underselling it a little bit, but yeah, this just never clicked for me. The Brock Roman thing has been done to death, and kind of ready to move on to it, or move away from it and move on to something else. I definitely know I'm not in the minority with that. I think a lot of people are over this program. But Roman is the undisputed, unified world champion, at least for the time being, until they decide to do a brand split and have 2 world titles again. But it was the right call here to go with Roman. And it will be interesting to see what they have lined up for him after the fact going into the summer. But, like I said, the match was exactly what I figured it would be. And, I mean, if this was their tagline for the greatest Mania match of all time, it certainly didn't live up to the hype, that's for sure. But I'll tell you what, I actually ended up enjoying a lot more of WrestleMania than I thought I would. Both nights, in fact. The Austin Owens match from night 1 was great. The Seth Cody match was a big highlight. I really enjoyed that match. From night 2, the Edge AJ match was good, despite the lackluster finish. And the Pat McAfee, Austin Theory, Vince McMahon, Steve Austin stuff, that was pretty grand. In retrospect, should I probably be pissed about Pat beating Theory only then to lose to a damn near 80-year-old man who's barely mobile to begin with? In 3 minutes, no less? Yeah, if I gave a shit about this company, yeah, I'd probably be pissed about that. But when it was capped with Austin coming down and giving Vince his comeuppance for the 840th time, it brought back a little bit of nostalgia from the 90s. By far, it was easily the hottest segment on either show. This definitely does not rank amongst the worst Manias of all time. But if I try to remove the mark blinders and see it for what it is, the shows really weren't all that good. At least when it comes to the wrestling aspect of things. Edge and AJ was the best wrestling match on night 2, and, Theory and Pat was good as an angle. But, the other stuff, when you really get down to it, wasn't good at all. I guess if you like the hokiness of the Sami Zayn match, you were going to enjoy that. But, collectively, when you look at both nights from top to bottom, who were the major stars? Well, I'll tell you who they were. Steve Austin and Vince McMahon. In 2022. It's one thing if we'd be talking about this in 1997 or 1998 when the Steve Austin, Vince McMahon program was hot. But in 2022, the other thing, too, is I think it's important to understand why WWE went out of their way to book all the celebrity appearances they did for the show in the first place. Why did Vince have to work an impromptu match and take a stunner at 76, 77, 78 years old when he knew he wasn't capable of taking the bump to begin with? Well, it's because they realized just how dreadful their talent pool is when it comes to star power and drawing ability. WWE had actually spent the last 10 or 15 years creating stars instead of outright burying potential ones or running them out of the company entirely. Maybe they could have been in better shape going into the show. They wouldn't have had to resort to the typical WWE formula of, well, desperate times call for desperate measures, so let's dig up the old dinosaur bones of the legends and try and sell some tickets and pop the crowd. I mean, it's always going to work as a short-term deal, but, we talk about this every single time. It's, what does it build towards? How does this help out a future generation of talent? Really doesn't. And even by that token, aside from Austin and Vince, the celebs they brought in for this year were completely out of my wheelhouse of expertise. Not that I'm really too privy to pop culture to begin with, but Johnny Knoxville and Logan Paul, those are the best options you can come up with for 2022. Maybe they are really big celebrities and names. Again, I'm not all that active on social media, and I'm not really big into the pop media culture, so maybe they are big deals. Who knows? But I don't know, they didn't look all that big a deal to me. The other thing, too, to remember is, what does all the fallout happen from here? Or where does all the fallout go? Like, let me ask you this question. Let's, again, get off your high horse and take off the Mark blinders and try to just look at the show in a bubble and as an analyst for a minute. Did you get a good sense that WWE was on a track of building or elevating new stars after this show? Do you see a clear-cut vision or pathway for the bulk, or at least maybe even a quarter of the wrestlers that were booked for this show? Pat McAfee was probably the closest thing they had to elevating new potential stars, and he's a fucking commentator on Smackdown. Now, what they do with Cody Rhodes, that might have actually been the most intriguing story of either night, because at least there's some speculation and the hope that things actually work out for him in his second run with the company. But when the show was over, I couldn't tell you what they were setting up post-Mania or probable big programs they could do for SummerSlam. Not even close. Anyway, I've really overstayed my welcome here. This one's going up late, so I know I got a lot of editing on the horizon. But thanks for watching. Make sure to sub, comment, and like the show. Again, feel free to leave your feedback on any and all material we talked about today. We'll be back this coming Friday for the next installment of the FSWR podcast. And again, check the show out on Rumble if you prefer watching on a secondary platform. But there's your big WrestleMania weekend. I think we covered a lot of ground here too, talking about AEW, NWA, got a Ring of Honor match in there, and we got WWE. So you got the full gamut this week for me. Just to let you know that I'm not in the tank for any specific organization. Wink, wink. Anyway, that'll do it for now. Take care, everyone. Peace out.